In the Vietnam War, according to official data, 58,000 soldiers of the U.S. Army, and according to unofficial data, U.S. soldiers who died and went missing more than 300,000. And in this video, you will learn the real reasons why the U.S. started the Vietnam War. The domino theory and the policy of containment. At the heart of America's decision to intervene in Vietnam lay the overarching geopolitical strategy of the Cold War, the containment of communism. Following World War II, U.S. policymakers viewed the spread of communism, championed by the Soviet Union and later the People's Republic of China, as an existential threat to democratic values and global stability. This fear crystallized into the domino theory, most famously articulated by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1954. The theory posited that if one nation in Southeast Asia fell to communism, in this case Vietnam, following the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu and the subsequent division of the country, then neighboring countries, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Burma, and potentially even India and Japan, would inevitably topple in succession, like a row of dominoes. This was not merely an abstract fear, it was informed by the recent loss of China to communism in 1949 and the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, which saw U.S. forces directly combating communist expansion. U.S. foreign policy, heavily influenced by George Kennan's earlier articulation of containment, aimed to prevent any further communist territorial gains. South Vietnam, officially the Republic of Vietnam, was seen as a critical frontier in this global struggle. Successive administrations, from Truman to Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson, believed that allowing South Vietnam to be overcome by the communist North Vietnam, backed by China and the Soviet Union, would represent a significant strategic victory for the communist bloc and a dangerous sign of American weakness or lack of resolve. The ideological commitment to containing communism, therefore, provided the foundational and most enduring justification for America's increasing military and economic commitment to South Vietnam, seen as a test case for American power and determination in the face of a global communist threat. Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy escalated military aid, and by 1965, Johnson committed combat troops to prevent a communist takeover. Historians debate whether the domino theory was valid, but it unquestionably drove U.S. intervention. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. While U.S. involvement had been growing for years, the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964 served as a pivotal catalyst for a dramatic escalation of American military action. The incident involved two alleged unprovoked attacks by North Vietnamese torpedo boats on U.S. destroyers, the USS Maddox and USS Turner Joy, in the Gulf of Tonkin. While the first attack on the Maddox, which was conducting signals intelligence operations, did occur, details about the second alleged attack on August 4th were murky, confused by bad weather and radar anomalies, and later evidence suggested it may not have happened at all, or was at least significantly misreported. While evidence of a second attack was dubious, President Lyndon B. Johnson used the incident to push Congress into passing the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, granting him broad war powers. Declassified documents later revealed that the U.S. had been conducting covert operations in the region, and the attack may have been exaggerated. Nevertheless, the resolution marked America's formal entry into large-scale warfare in Vietnam. Domestic political pressures and anti-communist sentiment. The domestic political climate in the United States during the Cold War played a significant role in shaping policy towards Vietnam. The post-World War II era was marked by intense anti-communist sentiment, often referred to as the Red Scare, exemplified by McCarthyism in the early 1950s. There was enormous public and political pressure on presidents to appear tough on communism. Plus, after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, 1961, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, the U.S. was determined to prove its strength. Withdrawal from Vietnam, policymakers argued, would make America look weak and embolden communist movements worldwide. President Kennedy had increased military advisors in Vietnam, and LBJ feared that abandoning South Vietnam would damage U.S. global standing. This credibility imperative kept the U.S. entrenched long after the war's futility became apparent. Gradual escalation and the quagmire effect. The U.S. entry into the Vietnam War was not a single abrupt decision, but rather a process of gradual escalation, often described as advisory creep or the quagmire effect. Each step of increased involvement, however small, made subsequent steps seem logical and necessary to protect prior investments of resources, prestige, and lives. Initial involvement under President Truman and Eisenhower consisted primarily of financial aid to the French colonial effort and then to the nascent South Vietnamese government under Ngo Dinh Diem. President Kennedy significantly expanded this by sending thousands of U.S. military advisors to train and support the South Vietnamese Army, ARVN, in its fight against the Viet Cong insurgency. With each increase in aid and personnel, the U.S. became more deeply entangled. The deteriorating political and military situation in South Vietnam, including Diem's increasingly autocratic and unpopular rule, culminating in his overthrow and assassination in a U.S.-backed coup in 1963, often led U.S. policymakers to believe that more American intervention was needed to prevent a collapse. This incremental approach meant that there was rarely a single moment where a clear decision to go to war was made. Rather, it was a series of smaller decisions, each seemingly justifiable at the time based on the prevailing circumstances and the desire to avoid defeat. Optimistic assessments from military commanders often suggested that just a little more effort, a few more troops, or a new bombing strategy would turn the tide. This one more step mentality, combined with bureaucratic inertia and the difficulty of admitting past policies were failing, drew the U.S. deeper and deeper into a conflict that proved far more complex, protracted, and costly than initially envisioned, ultimately leading to a full-scale, though undeclared, war. Political pressures and the loss of China, trauma. The who lost China? Debate after Mao's 1949 victory haunted U.S. politicians. No president wanted to be blamed for losing another country to communism. Lyndon Johnson, facing re-election in 1964, feared Republican accusations of being soft on communism. Escalation in Vietnam was seen as politically necessary, even as internal reports, like the Pentagon Papers, later showed officials privately doubted victory. That's right. Because of the short-sightedness of politicians and because of the fear that the Soviet Union would spread its influence to other countries, the U.S. started a war where more than 300,000 soldiers died and went missing.